Stat warm-ups.
27.
26.
25 seconds.
24, 23,
22 seconds.
21 seconds.
20 seconds,
19.
18. 17 seconds.
16,
15 seconds.
14,
13 seconds.
12.
11.
10 seconds.
9,
8. 7. 6.
Copy.
5 seconds.
3, 2, 1.
Everyone, I'm Robbie Sherman, Second Admiral in Command. Welcome to Subspace Chatter, where we boldly go into discussing Star Trek. Today we'll be talking about the newest episode of Star Trek Prodigy called All the World's a Stage. Let's go around and do introductions. On the top left here, Vanessa, I just realized I don't know your last name.
It's okay, you don't have to.
Okay,
I have a
fantastic.
YouTube channel called I Love Bad Star Trek.
You do love bad Star Trek. I've heard your YouTube channel. It's a fun time. Eve, would you like to say a word?
Sure. I'm Lieutenant Commander Eve Zellick with the Starfleet Academy College of Music.
All right. Third in command, Daniel, do you have anything to respond with? Daniel.
Dan?
All right. Hi, I'm the editor of the website warpfactorytrack.com.
Thank you for having us all here together, Dan. You do most of the planning for all this stuff, it seems. Yeah. I do not know your name, friend, with the All the World's a Stage background. I should have learned that before we started, friend.
I'm Dustin from the YouTube channel.
You're
Best of
Dustin.
Trek, Worst of Trek. Thanks for having me back on Subspice Chatter.
I like your Picard impression. And with opinions nobody cares about.
Yeah, I'm Scott, host of the YouTube channel Opinions No One Cares About. Hey, I said it right again. I usually get that wrong.
Yep. You usually say opinions people care about, right? That's how you get it wrong most of the time, right? All right, we're just going to drop that bit, and we're moving on. We're here to talk about All the World's a Stage, the newest episode of Star Trek Prodigy, the younger focused Star Trek animated series. If you are not familiar with the show, it follows a group of refugee children who escape from a mining colony headed by a very, very bad man who wants to take down Starfleet for some reason that isn't revealed until about episode 10. I'm assuming you've already watched episode 10 if you're already here. Where would you guys like to start with the episode? I guess we need to go through plot first a little bit. This episode involves our crew. No, I'm just blanking. I'm so sorry. This episode involves our... God, I don't know why I'm blanking all of a sudden. Would you like to take over for a second, Eve, or somebody, please?
I just woke up, so I'm going to pass on that one.
So yeah, this episode has the crew understanding that they have to avoid Starfleet and they might as well do good things along the way, and they stumble upon a planet that sent out a distress signal, and there are Starflight, oh my god, Starflight cosplayers. And they also have an illness that is resolved by the crew of the Protostar. We also have I forget the name of the other ship. Can anyone help me out with that one?
Dauntless?
Thank you. The Dauntless is following them, and the Diviner is beginning to awaken. And he's feeding them a bunch of crap. But it looks like his mind's a little bit in pieces, so maybe he's like convinced of the version of the story that he's telling.
Seems like he got a lot less memory loss than we would have thought.
So
Zero real good.
I am not qualified to answer this particular question, but I'm going to ask if that's cool, Robbie.
I don't care.
Good?
Go ahead.
Okay. What similarities, if any, do you see between this episode and the Voyager episode, Live Fast and Prosper?
Yep, mutant right now. Haven't actually seen that one.
And I can't recall what that one's about because I can't do titles.
That's the one where they come back upon the two. Oh wait, no. That's the one where the people impersonate Janeway and Tuvok, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that mixed up with the one with the two Ferengi because that's also Live Fast. The Ferengi titles and Prophet titles are kind of all over the place. Yes.
Yeah. 3 Ferengi, I think.
I had to catch up on Prodigy, so I did not even get to watch that episode to compare. So if anybody has comparisons, they're probably going to have to pull them out before I do.
Yeah,
I think
the best for that.
It involves like aliens, like sort of doing impressions or trying to pass off as like Starfleet people, and also like has like a sort of turn on the "live long and prosper" phrase that we're familiar with. Obviously, like with the title being "Live Fast and Prosper," and what's the change in this episode?
Is that the one where the people who are impersonating him are doing bad
Yes.
things in their name?
Yeah,
Okay, now I remember.
and they've got bumps on their heads.
Well, that doesn't really narrow it down.
That's
yet.
like half the races.
Yeah,
I know.
The bigger callback I see in Voyager is to Muse, with where B'Elanna makes that or helps that playwright come up with a play about Voyager in the second person, like they're doing here.
This is what I get for only being on season 2.
That's right, Scott. No minute will be unfilled with Voyager. Every waking moment of your life from now until next week will be Voyager.
Spoilers.
And Prodigy.
Maybe we'll see if
So
there's some
you must-
technology we can IV it into your arm. Or
Hey,
I can-
maybe
I've been
maybe
waiting.
maybe you'll see a goth Janeway in your dreams. Yeah, you can always hope, buddy. I do want to focus on the actual alien race they come across that has been impersonating Starfleet for like a generation now, like 100 years or something like that. And that whole thing has more to do with like meta commentary about like Star Trek fans than it does like just showing their race, because they have a lot of little kind of goofy digs at Star Trek fans with it, and frankly I'm not offended by it. I think it's a light-hearted thing for the parents to kind of giggle at, and then the kids, like maybe they'll find a little bit of mean humor in it. But I also think a lot of kids, a lot of younger people, and this was happening while I was growing up, they don't really take Star Trek very seriously because of the uniforms and because of the very uptight practices that a lot of the series indulge in. So I didn't have any issue with this, and I thought it was on the better end of ironic humor. It wasn't too... Dan, you really did not like this episode, and that was a good part of it. Would you like to go further into your feelings?
Yeah, so the first time that I watched this episode, I was like, I turned it off midway because I found it so frustrating. And especially after it was like a follow-up to the Kirk that we've just seen in Strange New Worlds didn't have like any of like William Shatner's, pacing dialogue. And then for this episode to air, which, someone is, one of these aliens are impersonating like directly William Shatner's Kirk portrayal and doing it to such an nth degree that I then watched the episode again and loved it. And especially like the I guess like I took on board what the writer Aaron personally told me, and like he was encouraging me to watch the rest of the episode, and he was like the rest of the episode totally flips that on its head. And
Yeah.
but also like the way that I took like the impersonation of William Shatner was eventually not an impersonation of William Shatner himself, but an impersonation of like how the fans or people in general, I guess, have taken like William Shatner's portrayal of Kirk over the years, but isn't actually, you know, most of the time he's not actually like that stuttered in his dialogue.
Yeah, but also, I mean, the way that James T acts, which by the way is the funniest part of the episode for me, because this is like literally the way he lives. Like he was brought up like that. You know, obviously we see it as, you know, an impersonation, but this guy's basically going off what an ensign told like some of his ancestors 100 years ago. It's like this was how Kirk acted.
Like a game of telephone.
Yeah, basically. The whole thing is really like a game of telephone. And I love that it was a kind of like a callback to a classic TOS episode where they show up on a planet that looks a lot like Earth and happens to have absorbed a particular part of its culture.
Yeah, I also found it really interesting because like watching this episode, I was like, this is a completely like being familiar with the evolution of the 30th anniversary episode that was written for Deep Space Nine, i.e. Trials and Tribulations, and knowing that the original version of that episode had a return to Sigma Iosha 2, and which the Ioshians would have been found to have really, like, you know, taken up like Starfleet's ethos or whatever as a template to like model themselves on. I found it really interesting that Aaron has told me that he completely was unfamiliar with that until like he pitched the idea for this Prodigy episode in the writer's room.
Hey, thank you for sharing. That's very cool.
I kind of got some weird. For me, this one reminded me a lot. In some ways, it reminded me of and I could have the title wrong, and Dan can correct me. The TNG one where they find that astronaut who died in the mock-up of a casino, the Casino Royale one.
Right.
Yes, Royale.
And it was because the aliens were really trying their best to give the guy a home, but all they had to go on was some like trashy penny novel about a casino and gangsters and stuff like that. But at the same time, I also got Galaxy Quest vibes out of this.
Yeah, I did think it was like lovingly parodying it in a certain manner. And I think they set up the alien race to be innocents. So when the parody goes through, it's not on the backs of the people that are engaged in doing the parody. They're doing it in a naive way. And it's just them living their lives and like practicing this culture they have been playing a game of telephone with for so long.
But the thing is, like, when they land on this planet, right, and they say, oh, these people are like playing pretend and they're just faking or whatever, but then the Medusan does a scan and they realize that they're not faking. This is what they actually believe in. This is their way of life. This isn't just like something they just do for fun and then they go back to their normal life. No, this is entirely how they've structured their way of life. It isn't like just some projection to comfort somebody else that may be familiar with it. So through an ensign sort of describing the Federation and Starfleet, they just decided independently, that sounds like an interesting idea. And not just in terms of like impersonations or, you know, the uniforms, obviously, but like the principles of helping people, the principle of egalitarianism, the idea that, like, you know, the things that are important to them are in alignment with that of Starfleet. So they haven't even done spacefaring stuff. This is a pre-warp civilization, which makes it a violation of the Prime Directive. So it's, to me, the fact that they had been able to, you know, indirectly positively impact these people because they seem to really grasp and thrive in this environment. And, you know, they aren't the gangsters that were originally pitched in that Deep Space Nine episode. So there's not like this big moral upturning. That seems to be the message of that premise. Like, see, we're a lot better now. We used to be gangsters, and now we're this. So it was just, they just heard this idea and thought, wow, that's actually really amazing. I would like to be a part of it. And it's also meant to like mirror the Prodigy crew themselves, how they're moving around and not officially in alignment with Starfleet. They literally can't be, because of the nature of that thing, the weapon on their ship that they can't get rid of or anything. So it's like, there's a lot of mirroring going on. There's a mirror of the civilization that they find to the audience themselves, that like gatekeeping about certain minutia. If they get the general understanding of Star Trek right, that like, you know, getting on them about, oh, this uniform doesn't look right, or this ship doesn't look right, or this detail, you know, like that kind of gatekeeping doesn't really, it's not really productive and useful, and you know, would turn away a potential fan. And I absolutely love this episode for that. Like, there's a lot of layers there.
Growing up, the technical aspects were always the worst part of the show for me, and it wasn't until I started getting old enough to be able to connect to the human writing of the show that I really embraced it as a teen. And I've gone through periods where I've been real up and down with Trek. There's large portions of Trek I'm not as fond of, and some of it's because the writers definitely like to bite the hand that feeds them. But I thought they had an okay enough trick in this episode to get some commentary in without turning the people who are making the commentary into a joke. I really like the speech the Doctor gives Dahl as he's putting he puts the leeches on, and Dahl's like, oh, that does feel good, and he's like, yeah, we found out that when we do this to our patients, it helps relieve the symptoms. So they have some sense of medicine and science, and they have a sense of morality and ethics. I really didn't have any issue at all with it. When it gets a little blunt, like when Jankum Pog like kind of calls him dumb, and it felt a little blunt, but it didn't feel like offensive the way another show might. How did you feel, Dustin?
About what?
Just
the whole episode?
Well, I mean, just about like that little area, like the satire, the light satire they're trying to do with these people. And how
I loved the satire. That's the best part of the episode for me. It's somewhere in between Lower Decks and a serious episode of Star Trek, while still being a kids show. So it's both lighthearted and easy enough to digest for kids to pick up on and be their first introduction to the nuances and the funny bits that have been around Star Trek for years.
Yeah, I think the episode where they go through the Kobayashi Maru stuff is a fantastic way to introduce kids to the larger Star Trek casting players, to the larger ethical dilemmas that Star Trek is focused with on the whole. I don't have any issue at all with this series. I haven't, as far as it being a kid show, to bring new Star Trek people in, I'm perfectly okay with it on that level. Dan, do you have any more criticisms you'd like to field as far as that area of the show goes?
No.
All right,
what I will say is when Vanessa was talking about the civilization, like, occurred to me that it seems like a continuation of how the series is like playing with how First Contacts might turn out, because, well, I've just watched the episode before this, Let Sleeping Borgs Lie, or Sleeping Borg Lie, and found like it sets up like the distress call that's paid off in this episode, and well, it was mentioned earlier in this discussion, like it also sets up like the diviner coming, being aroused or being roused. I mean, well, also,
It's okay to have emotions.
Regarding First Contacts, like that episode set up, or I think it might have been the end of the mid-season. I mean, the start of the mid-season break, with the two-parter that the Diviner's planet was, or civilization was destroyed due to a first contact with the Federation. So it's like paying off again. Like the First Contact might go disastrously wrong in that sense, or disastrously wrong in the sense of, an unintentional breaking of the Prime Directive in this case.
Well, the Prime Directive has been treated like a rubber band the whole time they've had it in Star Trek. We use it sometimes, we break it when it's convenient, and sometimes we ignore it. And
sometimes
it entirely.
Yeah, there's that one episode where Data makes friends with a little girl on a dying planet, and he brings her on here, and Picard is just like, Data, you were supposed to let her die. Let her burn in lava, Data. What are you doing? You've destroyed the Prime Directive. Like,
pen pals.
It's funny because it's usually TOS where the Prime Directive was mentioned right before they decided to break it anyway.
The original series, they're just kind of going in gung-ho, like, hey, what's going
General
on,
order,
Like, that episode Trial and Tribulations you mentioned before, there's like this recounting of Cisco saying like, describing what happened in that time. And he brings up Captain Kirk to the temporal police or whatever. And he's like, oh, Kirk, he broke the temporal Prime Directive I don't know how many times. Like, what is it good for?
We got a comment from below that says, hey guys, keep up the good work.
I wanted to point that out. Thank you, Balloonhead Productions. That must have been hard to get a library card for. I sometimes when I watch Star Trek, I'm a little frustrated by the Prime Directive because it doesn't really seem like, for a lot of Star Trek, it seems like its only purpose is to make sure that the Federation is always on top of primitive civilizations, and that they can't like evolve. Like, they have to do it on their own. That could be thousands of years, and a whole generation of people could just die with that attitude.
But I think what this episode points out is evolution shouldn't be determined by technology alone.
True.
The fact that we just sort of determine, okay, they're just not ready to know about things based on what they have and don't toy-wise is ridiculous. It's condescending, and clearly they were, receptive to the idea of, not that like hegemony and propaganda are 100% the point, but clearly they were, ready to hear about Starflight, whatever.
Starflight. Oh my gosh! If you guys put freaking subtitles on and see the way they miswrote everybody's names. Everybody's name has an apostrophe in it. Okay, like James T is actually James apostrophe T.
Oh, cute. I like that.
Like and son and stuff.
Yes.
But isn't that how you typically sci-fi a name? Just put a random apostrophe in there somewhere just to show that it's a sci-fi name.
So, like, what do you think was the funniest part of the episode? For me, it was Sulu's impersonation. I love that. That was great.
And I do like the Kirk impersonation a lot. It reminds me of the impersonations that would pop up on the Ben Stiller show. I used to watch that in reruns all the time, and it always makes me laugh. I love a dramatic Kirk.
Reminds me of the time William Shatner apparently entered a Kirk impersonation contest and came in second.
Well, he didn't have his Mike Myers mask, that's why.
I think Dolly Parton had the same thing happen to her.
Yeah, she went in a Dolly Parton contest and she came in second.
What was the funniest part to you, Dustin?
Yes, please.
Definitely just the parts we've been talking about, the Sulu and the Federation.
Yeah.
Easily.
I think the the whole thing is just a tad ham-fisted in a way that isn't as funny as it could be. And I feel like it's more like wordplay for kids, like to try to get them laughing at the mannerisms than it actually is about like very good subtle digs at Star Trek. I guess if the adults want to go for the good subtle digs at Star Trek, they gotta tune in for Lower Decks.
Has anybody seen Be Kind and Rewind?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so like the little plays that they did of like this stories that they heard from the ensign, that reminded me a lot of that with the cardboard props and everything. I loved it. Anyway, I'm sorry, Dan, if you were about to say something.
Go ahead, Dan, please.
I thought, well, actually, it ties in quite well with what you were talking about, Vanessa, which, like, the scene I thought was funniest was when they were doing one of those plays, and then Jancom Pog is like, when they realized, like, the people in the plays were talking about them, which personally, like, the plays reminded me of, like, Game of Thrones a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the one thing about the names that I didn't mind so much was when they referred to Spock as Sprock. Because I was like, no, that could be a Vulcan male's name, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not very funny. Come on, guys. You get paid the big dollars. You have health insurance. Give us better names.
I thought on the ham-fisted thing, like Robbie, you were saying, it was a bit ham-fisted and like, it wasn't subtle and stuff. Because it is geared towards a younger age group for the most part. I mean, kids don't pick up on subtlety. Like for them, humor has to be like pretty much very, very blunt, very easy to pick up on. So I think that's why we see more of the ham-fistedness, to make sure that the kids are getting it. Because I do have piano students who watch the show, and for them, they latch on to the stuff that's over the top and ridiculous, and because that's how kids are. Kids have that.
Yeah.
Kids don't do subtlety because they don't have the life experience, you know? So for them, the whole, you know, I am James, he is funny because they can imitate it. You know, it's supposed to be like something they can latch on to. So I think that's why it's so ham-fisted.
And we have seen farts from both Jenkum and Murph.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess if you didn't, I guess if you didn't grow up with the Jim Carrey version of William Shatner, it might not be as funny to you.
I forgot about that. Oh man, yeah, that is a hilarious impression.
There's like a whole video of Shatner watching impersonations of himself that I would highly, highly recommend. It is great. He even roasts the cameraman behind the camera. Like it's really awesome. And Jim Carrey, he's like, I don't talk like that. He'll do like an impersonation of Jim Carrey impersonating him. It's great. Anyway, what does everybody think happened to Chakotay?
I don't think anything happened to him. I think he's just hanging around on one of those resort planets, having a nice margarita. He just turned his cell phone off for a few days. You know, I think it's not that big of a mystery. I'm just kidding.
I think the diviner was right about him being captured. I just think he doesn't realize yet that he was the one that did it.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't be surprised if he was like in a prison or something the diviner has set up on that rock planet of his.
Chakotay really does have a lot of bad luck with stuff like that, like falling into people's traps. So I would have to say that I agree with the idea that he's probably like in a prison somewhere, and it may not even be like a physical prison. It could be a mental prison, because we've seen that done in Voyager, where they like prison Tom in the recreation of the murder that he didn't commit and stuff like that. Or what they did with O'Brien, where they had him experience like 20 years of jail in like a matter of days, and it totally messed with his head. And Chakotay, I mean, how many times was Chakotay undone by Seska? Chakotay's a nice guy, but he really isn't the brightest when it comes to avoiding things. I mean, he even said it in Voyager. He's like, you were working for her. She was working for them. Was anyone on the ship working for me? Like, he's like the worst Maquis I've ever seen.
How do you feel about Chakotay, Dustin?
I think Chuck O'Tay might be the diviner. I don't know how that's going to play out to be
Oh.
canon, but I think there's at least a small chance that they are one and the same.
Maybe the diviner has some type of soul transference thing, which I that's about as scientific as any other thing explained in this show so far. And like maybe he can like take over bodies and then get his original presence back. It'd be a good way to explain where the hell Chakotay is at, and then it would also give like a very intense reasoning for Janeway to turn on this diviner. Because right now, Janeway thinks he's the victim of a massive attack and that he's.
I think the diviner at this point thinks that he's a victim of a massive attack.
Yeah, and
I think his
because
mind is completely turned
and because of that, Janeway is taking him at face value because she doesn't have any other way to interpret the information.
Well, she's a hologram, so I mean, she is limited to what she can, like her processes and.
No, we're
talking about real Janeway.
Oh, yeah, real one on.
Yeah, just call her RJ.
Yeah, let's do that because otherwise it's a little confusing.
Air Janeway.
Janeway 2.0.
Yeah,
that's the hologram. Janeway 2.0.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I asked. I forgot to include it, but like, why is hologram Janeway like the younger version that we know from Voyager, whereas the Admiral, because they exist concurrently, right? Because like, Chakotay went off into deep space, into the Gamma Quadrant with the Protostar, saying goodbye to Admiral Janeway. So it's like, why was it his call to make her the younger version? Like, why?
Because season
after, if she wanted to be like the template for the hologram.
Not.
Yeah, but make me the younger version.
Sorry, not the Gamma Quadrant, but the Delta Quadrant.
It could be a vanity thing that she was younger, or it could be the fact that because it was supposed to be like a cadet training program, having the younger version of her would come across as more of their mentor and less authoritarian than a huge admiral with all the bars and ranks and the gray hairs and everything. Because, I mean, if you're talking a cadet training program and cadets out for their first time, we've seen what happens when cadets are left without proper mentorship. I mean, there was an episode in Deep Space Nine where Nog ends up on that ship of cadets, the Red Squad or whatever. And so I think that's probably why. I don't think it's a vanity thing. I think it was just a deliberate thing just to make her look like a mentor instead of an authoritarian figure.
Tilly had a cadet die on a mission on her first one.
Yeah.
Tough love.
First one, taking cadets out. Just saying.
I really enjoyed the red shirt thing like they did during the play. They had like a whole little red shirt joke. I don't remember the semantics of it at the moment, but I just remember thinking it was funny. Like that was a genuinely funny thing for me.
You know, you gotta wonder, like, it just occurred to me, like, all of their outfits or uniforms, if you want to call them that, are green. Like, where did they get that idea from?
I wonder if that's a poke at the Orville, because we see that same shade of green in the Orville.
I've wondered if it's the fact that the gold shirts were apparently green and just looked gold due to the lighting and stuff.
We also have seen the blue color change through the years. I mean, it's like that powder blue in TOS, and then it became like the more primary blue that we see Maddox wear in TNG, and then later on it became more of that teal blue that Bashir wears. Like the blue has changed the most out of all the colors, so maybe it's pointing at that too, because they've never had a consistent blue all the way through.
I find it pretty. Go ahead, whoever wanted to talk. Okay, well, I find it pretty interesting that all the uniforms for everybody right now, like in our main Prodigy cast, are gray, and they're all kind of on the same level. They don't have these colors separating them, even though Dahl is the de facto captain. I just really like the idea that they don't have these colors putting them into hierarchies. It's another thing that separates them from like actual Starfleet and gives them an edge in a way that other Starfleet officers don't have. I really like the idea that they came to the conclusion that it was okay to like help these people a little bit more, and that the Prime Directive didn't exactly apply here as much as it did before. And I thought that, let's face it, a lot of Starfleet people, they're going to be too tied to the Prime Directive to really make that decision. And since they're not actually official Starfleet, they can think outside of that somewhat militaristic idea.
That to me is what Prodigy is all about, is removing the militaristic component from Starfleet and imagining it what that would look like.
This is like the Caddyshack of Star Trek series.
If they were just the altruistic thing that they tout themselves to be.
Regarding the uniforms, I find hologram Janeway's uniform really interesting.
I'm picturing the gopher from yesterday. Somebody said Caddyshack. Yesterday's gopher dance. Yeah, you know what I mean. Caddyshack, I'm sorry. That's the first thing that popped in my head was the darn gopher.
That's like Murph is the gopher in this situation if we're comparing the show to Caddyshack.
Fair.
It's
and what do you think
not
Murph is
antagonistic. What?
Like, what do we think Murph is turning into? Because, you know, he's in like an egg sack or whatever at the end.
His truest self, my friend.
I think he might be transforming into a Transformer like Optimus Prime or someone like that.
Yeah, they do have that new show coming out, and it has the exact same animation style, so we can have crossovers, baby. Yes. It looks the same.
I'm going to go like boring and say I think he's just going to turn into like some kind of insectoid or reptilian, just because that would fit with the way he's going into like his cocoon or whatever, his sack. But I mean, to me, he's like the baby Yoda of the show. He's there to be cute. So I'm hoping whatever he comes out as is still cute.
Yeah. I know people were still upset because like they didn't get a Murph plushie because they want a Murph plushie. And now apparently he's going to mutate into something else that they probably won't make into a toy.
I want a Murph plushie.
What do you think he's turning into, Dustin?
Same thing Eve said. I mean, I think it's just going to be some kind of bug insect creature.
Does anybody get like Pokemon vibes from Murph? Like, I feel like Murph has just been going through a gradual leveling up process, and now he's in his cocoon. He's going to emerge a beautiful Butterfree. I for one look forward to it.
Going through goo, some kind of puberty, and on the other side, who knows, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be a humanoid. You know, that's what I'm thinking. It's going to be like
He'll ascend into pure energy.
Yeah, that could happen too.
Murph is going to eat the living construct. Because I couldn't help notice that he didn't start getting sick until that thing activated.
That's true. And he's eaten other weird things before. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking that he ate a grenade or something before. Like, he's eaten weapons in the past.
He's indestructible. They should be using him way more than they do. But yeah.
Well, I get the sense he's an infant too, and that's why they don't. Because, I mean, you see I can't remember her name, but the giant rock girl. Like, yeah, I have trouble with the names in this one, but yeah, she treats him like a baby too. She carries him around, and he's like her little baby brother.
Right, like that she stays behind the whole time to watch over Murph.
Yeah.
But, you know, what is a baby really? That's the question. Can we just enlist them to do life or death situations? I don't see why not. That's all.
We are one step away from doing the That's a Family joke from the Birthday Boys. Oh, my word. That's a baby. The six podcasters in a meeting. That's a baby.
Yep.
All right. I don't think we have a whole lot more we can really discuss out of the episode. How do you guys feel about its expression of the power of myth? I found it really intriguing. I think it's something we need to kind of focus on too when we're looking at Star Trek. Sometimes I don't think they analyze the power a myth can have over a culture, over so many generations. Like, of course, in our regular world, a lot of people would say we deal with mythology all the time through various religious texts, through pop culture. Please, your larger thoughts. Anybody?
I mean, there's that book by Joseph Campbell called The Power of Myth.
Right.
which I highly recommend. Hero of a Thousand Faces, also a great book. Talks about how storytelling sort of reverberates throughout different cultures and what parallels they draw and what kind of stories, what kind of power a story has over time. And I think this is about, Star Trek sort of recognizing its own power of myth and sort of making a meta commentary about the kind of impact it has on its own audience, and like how, if they understand the principles of it, the principle of giving, the principle of equity, the principles of, valuing everyone and letting somebody encounter a challenge and allowing them to rise to the occasion, which specifically towards the very end, where the aliens were on the protostar and they used the TOS bridge instead, like that, they just needed the tools to rise to the occasion. That's it. They aren't ignorant, just needed a little bit of help.
Yeah,
and I enjoyed that a lot.
Episode, though.
When it comes to the power of myth too, I mean, I always think of it as myth and story is a way for us to, one, relate to our world, but it's also a way for us to relate to each other. And that brings me to thinking about the Darmok episode. I mean, that's a culture where their myth is so prevalent that it's their entire speech. Everything in their history, whether it happened or not, is how they speak to each other. And I mean, you look at how powerful myth can get. What is the basis of a lot of religions? There was a story. Maybe the person was real, maybe it wasn't. I'm not going to say yes or no because I'm kind of ambivalent. But you look at like ancient Greek gods. Look at how powerful that mythos is, that even now, centuries later, when we know there's probably not a giant Apollo like in TOS out there, we still refer to those things. People still talk about, you think of Zeus and thunderbolts. You think of the sea, you think of Poseidon. Like, even centuries later, it's still here. So, I mean, it's almost like it's like we're creating something that's also like lives past us.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Also, like William Shatner's talked about like those sort of ancient myths and said like that Star Trek and sci-fi in general is like a continuation of that tradition.
Yeah.
I live around so many very conservative people. I have a hard time explaining to them that a lot of the religion they take is straight history. There's a very good possibility that a lot of it might equal to myth. And I think it's interesting seeing it in this episode, like, and how this plays out to where, like, this mythology that the culture immersed itself in actually became a divine force for them and helped them move further into more complex thinking, more complex ideology. Whereas a lot of people might say that mythology can oftentimes have the opposite effect, and it can leave people mired in things that are just superstitions and don't help them. So I do like that they kept a positive spin to the mythology aspect of it, and that they didn't like look down on them in a sort of dogmatic atheist sort of way. When they first come in, the main Prodigy cast is a bit condescending, but after a while they have to realize, like, oh, okay, these people aren't they aren't primitive the way we think they are. They do have a certain amount of common sense. They do have a certain ability to use tools and adapt. I'm trying to think of how to end that point properly. But anyway, go ahead, please.
I was going to help you finish. So
yeah,
the mythology here, it's not just made up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
This is based on a real set of cults from the Pacific that popped up after the Americans built mini bases across the Pacific during World War II. And then they drop cargo and give them things. And then when the Americans pulled out, there were still these cults that basically thought airplanes and the things that the army were doing was magic. So
There's the Prince Philip cult. There's a group, a tribe. I can't remember, and it came out. It
Yeah.
came about
The John Frum cult, and one of the things they believe is that Prince Philip may be one of many figures that may be the promised God that will come back and bring them the things that they want.
I didn't necessarily think that their interpretation, the aliens' interpretation of Starfleet, was on par with like a religion. I actually thought that they pragmatically infused it into their culture and didn't like look at it. Wasn't like they weren't
like worshiping an idol.
Yes,
exactly.
So
they have like Ensign Garavic's uniform and his phaser, but they're not like religious artifacts. They're just framed.
Yeah, we don't see anybody like worshiping on the ground like a phaser or something like that, and that definitely helps for me, anyways.
Well, in these cults, nobody's worshiping anything per se either. They're waiting for the return, just like these people waiting for the return of the Federations.
Yeah. The thing is too, like, I just had a weird thought. I mean, you look at this race, and their entire identity for the most part is wrapped up in this mythology that's been passed down. And in a sense too, I have to wonder if some of the Prodigy crew wanting to help them comes out of the fact that the Prodigy crew really doesn't have an identity for themselves. Like, you look at Dal doesn't know who or what he is, you know? They don't know anything out. They're learning as they're going because they really don't know anything outside the world they were raised in. I mean, we saw that with Rock, where when they're told for the first time they can eat whatever they want, and they're like, "Why are you eating that same goop they fed us?" And she's like, "It's the only thing I've ever eaten." Like, you know, we've got a group that doesn't really have an identity yet because they're trying to discover themselves, and they're meeting a group that has a very solid identity, regardless of how they got it. So I thought that was an interesting contrast between the two groups.
It really shows like what kind of background someone would like. That Starfleet, the idea of this pursuit is attractive to somebody, even if their view of the world is extremely narrow.
Yeah,
by force. Like all the people, including the diviner's daughter, have been living a very oppressed, very sheltered life of, you know, servitude and force, and seeing no other side of that, really. Like, they're just lifetime going to be imprisoned, and suddenly they're not. And it's like, whoa, we're in like this huge open sandbox in a really fast ship, and they're choosing to do good. But what's interesting about this is that the path of destruction that they're leaving behind by accident, and they're going to find that person that took the escape pod out of that space station and get a firsthand account of exactly what happened. Because, like, I'm really excited to hear like what happens when they find that escapee in the escape pod and get his version. How that's going to compound Admiral Janeway's picture of this. Meanwhile, the Protostar is going around trying to do good and save people and like fix problems and answer distress calls and stuff.
I have a question. Has anybody else tried to figure out exactly where this planet is? This planet that was visited, or was at least in range of the TOS Enterprise 100 years ago, but is apparently also in range of this shutdown Borg cube, assuming that they were replying to the same distress call they picked up last week. But apparently further away from the Federation's like furthest communications relay. I don't know. I've been trying to figure out like where the Protostar is and in relation to like where this planet is. It's been difficult.
I think Borg can kind of go from one place to another super quick. Sorry, Dustin.
No, you're okay. I put some thought into this question this week, actually. There's three things working for you. One, you got to remember it's a kid's show. Two, you got to think about the fact that from the second episode of TOS, we're at the edge of the galaxy, and by the fifth movie, we've gone to the center of the galaxy. Meanwhile, it was going to take Janeway 70 years to get less distance than that at home. You can't take TOS's scale of the universe as canon versus the future pieces. So there's that, and then you've got the protostar that's got the protodrive, and they can jump like 50,000 light years in a second. So there are all those things working for you.
Yeah, but how often are they using that? You'd think they would, though. Like, the animation is really cool. You'd think they'd use that more than once.
I think quite a lot. Like when in the previous episodes, they talk about like where they're trying to find the protostar. They say like where was the last proto jump, they call it, and they track it to the the relay station.
It's a good thing you bring up. Some of the stuff has been brought up because I think it points out a kind of plot hole in part 2 of A Moral Star, where everyone gets released from their shackles. I guess that's the best way to put it. And they just suddenly know what to do. And these are people who have, if they hadn't spent most of their lives before getting there just doing like whatever little task they were given to do, they've been there their whole lives. So for them to just be able to come out and like use computers and do this other stuff, that felt like a bit of quick plot shorthand to me. But then I also wonder like how easy is it to use the computers in Star Trek? Like I was mentioning earlier, whenever I watch someone use a computer on Star Trek, it feels like watching Bruce Wayne type at a like numberless keyboard on Batman the Animated Series. Like it can just do anything, and they can just walk up and be like, dip, 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 dip. There we go. We got what we needed to do. And it's frustrating on a plot level for me as an adult, but I also want to forgive it because I know it's a show for kids, and giving kids that like moral boost is a lot better than being.
I think what is the point, the reason, like they want to at least where before the mid-season break, it looked as if there was a bit of a learning curve that they needed to sort of adjust to the environment of the protostar and understand it a little bit better. Like Janeway was putting them through their paces. So there was, the computers I can see, complex enough where, it's a little like hard to believe that they would have that solid of a grasp. But I also believe that being on the protostar long enough with the hologram, they would figure some things out eventually. And and honestly, a lot of what I've seen on like, these ships is automated.
Yeah.
Like, so I could see, with a lot of guidance from the hologram that they could, and it seems like they had specialties prior to coming onto the ship. Like Dahl was, a bit more on the intrepid side. So, taking a captain role actually makes sense for him because he's a coordinator, he's a planner, and there's the Tellarite that's more of a mechanic. We have the diviner's daughter who is a bit on the computer savvy side, and then I could see them with a little bit of patience and all of that being able to tackle that.
I do like the Tellarite as a mechanic. I'm sorry, the Tellarite as a mechanic is just funny because I always see Tellarites as being more like tinkerers, mechanics, things like that. Like they like to engineer things, And I have to wonder if that's why his initial thought was that they were dumb because, I mean, okay, he hasn't grown up with Tellarite culture, but we do know Tellarite culture is insult and argue about everything. So it could be that could be just his default setting. If we think of the brain as a computer, it could be just his default that he goes that way. Like, oh, it's not like anything I understand, so it's dumb.
Yeah. It could also just be Star Trek racism.
Speciesism.
He uses
speciesism, I should say.
He uses the term dum-dums quite a bit, and there's a habit of talking to himself in the third person?
I love the third person talk. Like whenever, like it's because of the way Jason Mountzukas portrays it. Jake and Pog, like he's so confident. I love that.
I was looking up the actor's credentials yesterday. He's got quite the impressive list, actually.
Oh, he's been one of my favorite comedians for the last 10 years. He's a comedy bang bang A-lister, baby.
Yeah, I first saw him on The League, and then I saw him in The Good Place and a few other things. He's incredible.
Yeah, now he does serious dramatic stuff, too.
Oh, yes. This is Derek. His brain
Sorry.
is wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, Eve.
So
Okay.
I was gonna ask, like, how many ring pips would you give this episode? I would give it personally 5. I think it checks all the boxes for me personally.
Sorry, I had the question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I wondered, like, what people thought of the Galileo, basically.
Oh, it was cool. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
nice to see. I like them using it as an actual plot device, and like it has a reasonable idea for what's creating the mess that these people are in and why they're getting sick. Yeah, it was perfect. It was fine.
I liked it, and for me, it was kind of funny because I was watching it with my husband, and he's more the Star Wars guy. He watches Star Trek just because I'm watching it, basically, and I wasn't really.
You must love him.
Yeah, kind of. So anyway, we were watching it, and usually I'm the one who picks up on things, and I wasn't paying attention at the time because I was doing something with the dog. And all of a sudden, he's like, Gallows. He's like, Galileo. He's like, it's got to be the Galileo. Like, he came up. He was the one who put it together. And I'm sitting there going, since when do you know anything about Star Trek? So for me, that was kind of funny. And then once it was the Galileo, I'm like, okay, that makes sense, like a radiation sickness or some kind of contaminant, because we've seen that happen before when technology got left behind or something and it's contaminated things. I mean, even in our world, that happens all the time, you know?
Eve, anytime your husband guesses something correctly about this Star Trek show, you just need to tell yourself that this is a TV show for children.
You should really just relax.
Yeah, but it's funny because, like I say, he doesn't know as much about it. Usually I'm the one telling him what everything is. Like, well, that's what this is, and this character does this. They're not supposed to do that.
I want to give this about 4 out of 5.
I was really saddened by the destruction of the Galileo. And then, because I thought also, like, it's a bit of a modern, like, equivalent to, like, having seen those audiences who were around when Star Trek 3 The Search of Spock came out and saw, like, the destruction of the Enterprise. And so I said, like, that I didn't so much like the destruction of the Galileo to Aaron, the guy who wrote the episode, and he was like, well, you never know, it may come back. And we were both like, well, maybe surely like the concept is more important than the actual physical manifestation, perhaps.
They run a ship where they can literally just make anything with a machine. So the Galileo could come back any moment they wanted it to if they had some blueprints.
And he
basically
also,
MacGuffin.
he mentioned like there have been several Galileos already.
Yeah, like there are several Enterprises already.
Right. All right, so what were you saying about Pips?
I would give it about a 4 out of 5, mostly because I thought like it could have been funnier. Like I understand the way they did the humor, like and why they did it that way. But I also felt like if we're going to try to appeal to mom and dad as well as the kids, maybe you need to make that satire just a slight bit subtler in a way that the parents haven't seen before. Because let's face it, any parent who's really watching this Star Trek series is a Star Trek fan. They know the Kirk impersonation. They know the Sulu impersonation. They know the red shirt jokes. They know all these jokes. These jokes have been around for 50 years pretty much. So like, I just have to give it like a 4 out of 5 on that level. I do think it works satirically, but I still think we could have had just a tad more subtlety in the satire.
Like a Disney movie does. Like Pixar does.
Yeah, sure.
Like Pixar's really good at hiding their adult jokes and making them look totally innocent.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
For me, I'm gonna say 2.
2?
Like Dan, I had a hard time getting through this one, and I don't usually agree with Dan on episodes, as everybody knows. So I'm almost.
I've noticed for sure.
Yeah, I should I should probably buy a lottery ticket because I actually agree. But yeah, for me it was a little bit of a cartoon Galaxy Quest, which wasn't bad, but at the same time, it was too. Even viewing it through the lens of somebody who works with children and knows the way children view things, it was a hard slog to get through. I'll be honest. It's probably one of my least favorite episodes of Prodigy so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you 2.5, and I'll tell you why. I was actually on board with most of this episode until some stuff happened that took me out of it. Specifically, the cave sequence with Rock and Gwyn and Jankum. You see this bit where the cave, it seems like it kind of collapses and they fall down a little bit. I mean, they're talking about how they can't get out of the cave. It was never established that the entrance to the cave was blocked off, because not only did they not try, but Jankum and the Enterprisians, which I love, actually collapsed the cave entrance later. So that entire thing seemed a little contrived. It's like they didn't even try to get out of the cave. And then inside the cave, like, Jankum goes from being a coward for most of the episode to bravely jumping into a shuttlecraft that's teetering on the edge of falling into a lake of plasma.
They're a little off and on about Jankum being a heroic figure, aren't they?
A little bit, yeah. But then the thing that got me, or the other thing that got me, it was great that they took James T and Sulu and Hura up to the Protostar.
Oh.
But, even Dal realized, we got these people who can maybe operate a Constitution-class ship at best.
Yeah.
Just a second. On the Protostar, and Janeway's like, "Oh no, we have something for that. We can make the controls look like their controls." Like, why do you have this? What purpose does this serve on a highly advanced starship that's designed to explore the Delta Quadrant?
Hey,
And all that took out of it for me at the end. So there was a little bit of a stumble at the finish line for me, and that's what brought it down.
Yeah, that's a big Bruce Wayne thing for me. Like, they can just operate these panels that they've been pretending to operate for 100 years, but that they don't actually have any labels on to tell you what's going on with it. So whenever we see this, it's just like people going, "Bup, bup, 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 bup. Yeah, I did it. I know what I'm doing." And I don't think starships work that way, even in children's shows. Dustin?
I'm going to go 4 on this one. I definitely think it's the best episode since the break resumed. It might even be the best episode to date, but I'm not quite ready to make that assertion yet.
I will.
I know you're all fleet captain, 5 stars on this one. I don't think we've seen a 5-star episode of Prodigy yet, but I don't think we've seen anything less than a 3 either. It's pretty middle of the road. This one was really fun. To go on the other side of what Robbie said, I love it for that reason, that you were just rehashing these jokes and we're bringing them to a new generation. I enjoyed this one a lot. My biggest downfall is in the same scene that Scott had, but not for the same reason. I don't mind the fact that we've got these holographic controls that can change, but how did these people know how to operate these controls to begin with? Just because you make a bunch of cardboard playset mock-ups and do a stage play doesn't mean you're going to know how to use those 23rd century controls any better than the 24th century controls.
If I make up a mock-up of controls from a fighter jet and I sit there for 100 years and flip them around, that does not mean I know how to fly a fighter jet.
Exactly. Guys, I got a red shirt again. I got another thing I'm doing. Unfortunately, it won't be for the last, I'm assuming, 5 minutes, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, look, we're finishing up anyways. It's been an hour. I don't think anybody wants to give too much more time to this episode.
Live long and proper.
Live long.
Dan, you got to give your pips still.
Yeah, come on, Danny.
So I'd say, after the first time of watching it, I'd give it, not even 1 out of 5. Give it half a pip. But then,
the first half-time of watching it.
Yeah, basically. Then the second time watching the first half of the episode, and the first time watching the second half of the episode. I don't know what you referred to that as, but anyway, I would probably give it a 4. So I'm probably gonna go halfway and call it a 3 or 3.5. 3, I'll call it.
Hey, that's fair. I'm glad to hear
And
you got out of your pit there.
I completely agree with the comments that Dustin made. Like, I really enjoyed it for like the jokes, the familiarity, but also I'm also like the whole time I've been like, how do they actually, for such a civilization that we're supposed to understand is a relatively primitive one. How are they actually able to use the controls?
Yeah.
Seems like
Yep.
strange.
Well, I do we have anything more to say before we head out? Okay. Thanks for the panelists. Thanks to the panelists for joining us in the discussion. And comment below and let us know what you thought about the episode. Please remember to like and subscribe to the video, and we'll see you next time on Subspace Chatter. Trek you later.